He was a bright boy. He wanted to study art history. And his father, who ran, I think, a fabric making business, he said, no, you know, this art history stuff, it's not a decent career for somebody. So Bernhard dutifully became a lawyer. But he said, I used to sneak away from the lectures on law and go and study the Rembrandt etchings in Berlin museums. As it turned out, that was the most profitable way he could have spent his time. And then in 1938, he, having been experimenting privately or with a friend in colour photography, which was then unknown, more or less, he got a job with Harrison's in St Martin's Lane, Printers to National Gallery, as long as he brought with him his one-shot colour camera, which was unknown in England. So he got somehow to England, and his father managed to pack up his camera and get it sent to a firm in Soho, which was making films like Night Mail and so on at the time. And he got a job in Harrison's, and there he worked as the only refugee in the firm, finding Zwemmer's bookshop up the road as a haven of civilization. During that time, his younger sister, younger by 15 years, got permission to get to England as long as she would do domestic housework. And he got permission for his parents, and they hesitated, and the war started before they had moved. They were murdered. Charlotte got to England, and when they were both interned in the Isle of Man, they managed to meet. He said it was tolerable living there, but not all that comfortable. But the companions there were also the most erudite and educated of scholarly people. I mean, I think Pevsner was there for a bit and other similar people. And there were lectures. And there was a young man who was later part of the Amadeus Quartet with his violin hung round his neck. And that was appreciated. They were fed on herrings. He said we had herrings 14 times a week. But the herrings were cheap and plentiful round the coasts of the Isle of Man, and better than nothing. When the war ended, Alan Lane of Penguin Books took him on as a general photographer for paintings and drawings for the Penguin History of Art. And Bernhard suggested also we make a series of small reproductions, fairly cheap, this sort of size. And Alan Lane said, oh yes, that's a good idea, go about it. Cheap, simple, and so on. But it was a good collection, you know. There was a Paul Klee and Nash. And after Bernhard died, I found a lot of proofs and samples and things in the basement of our house. And I got someone from Penguin along to look at them. He said, there's some of these things I've never seen before. Bernhard came along to get to Ganymed and had an interview with John Roberts. He was a stranger to me at the time, and was appointed the manager. And Bernhard told me later that he'd said to John Roberts, in a way, I've been searching all my life for this job. The machines were dug out of the rubble, and imported into England and set up in a little factory near at Yeading, near Heathrow, and started to print, and imported also some German experts, retouchers, who were only too glad to get out of Berlin. And of course he had the ability to talk in German, technically, to the German workers who came, but they were mixed up with English workers as well that he trained. And there in this little printing works, they produced all the extraordinary Ganymed facsimiles, which were published and usually in editions of 500, 600, but when they were printed, each copy was looked at very carefully, and if it wasn't good enough, chuck it out. It was a dying gasp of collotype printing. I mean, nobody would dream of doing it now, or even, you know, after the time. It's so difficult, it's so complicated, it's so dependent on weather, light. You can train the wrong person for 20 years and they still wouldn't be good enough. Impractical. No, yeah, I mean, they're not little things, you know. A machine would take up all my sitting room with great rollers. You didn't ink it automatically. You put ink on, you know, a bit more here. And sometimes the printers would roll up a piece of paper and blow down it because the slight moisture for the breath was just adjusted the gelatine surface, which, if it's too wet, doesn't print. If it's too dry, it prints too much, you know. It's all very handmade. And the paper was always the same that the artist used. In fact, I think one of the Turner watercolours that we did, the paper was made in the same mould that the paper was made for Turner. But I mean, the facsimile of the Cézanne, that was 16 colours. And Bernhard always thought that was the best that we ever did. It was becoming difficult to print like that, difficult to sell. Bernhard started another firm called Ganymed Original Editions Limited, which was to print by any variety of methods, by anywhere you could, artists' original prints in small, numbered, signed editions. And he particularly wanted to do, to get Kokoschka to illustrate King Lear, which he said, here you've got the greatest dramatist ever, the most marvellous play, and here is an artist who could match that. Yes, and he went up to Villeneuve near Geneva and saw Kokoschka, and Kokoschka said, after a bit of talking, this excites me very much, come back in 3 days. And in 3 days, Bernhard went back, and he'd done a picture of Edgar surrounded by forecasts of evil, which now is one of the 16 lithographs which were illustrated in this book. And Bernhard got the Oxford University Press, who were then the only printers in England who had the 17th century fell type, which Bernhard thought had those kind of unevenness that was going to be suitable to fit in with the plays. The Oxford University Press hadn't got enough fell type to set the whole thing, would set up a bit and samples and send it to me to check the proofs. I find it very difficult to read King Lear without weeping, and it's more difficult than ever when your eyes are full of tears to find a little bit of broken serif here and there. Ganymed had worked with Henry Moore, who, because through the connection with Land Humphreys, who had been already publishing many of his works, and we invented a series of what we called auto-collotypes, which meant that the artist drew colour separations which were then amalgamated and all printed together. Henry Moore went out to Ganymed's printing works, and he and Bernhard stood over the printer while they were doing it. And this colour, yes, no, we may put a bit more yellow in that, yes, this. And they were printed in limited editions of 75 copies each. There is one of them, a proof. You better look at that. In those days, if an artist made up to 75 copies of any print, that went free of purchase tax. Over that, the whole lot would be purchase tax, which was 100%. And it was going to make it absolutely impossible. So we decided that we will just make 75 copies, and each copy was numbered. Bernhard had to sign that he had destroyed all the proofs. Soon after that, I was invited to Bernhard's house for supper, and I saw that lampshade. And I said, "But Bernhard, you swore you destroyed everything." And Bernhard said, "There are different methods of destroying things." It's terribly faded now. Meitner was then living in an attic room in Golders Green, and I went there, and he knew French and German, and his wife knew English and German, and I knew English and French. So we had no common language, and she was mad, and they used to have rows in German in front of me. And once she came in and threw an orange enamel teapot at him, but missed. And I sat in front of him while he drew, and he made personal remarks in French about my appearance, which I didn't much like. Anyway, I ultimately received as a present the portrait, of which I've got a photograph. I accepted it, and he had it expensively framed for me. And I put it in the back of a cupboard. And some years later, my old friend Elizabeth Robinson said, what happened to that awful drawing that Meitner did of you? And I said, "Oh, it's in the cupboard." So I got it out, and she said, "It's awful, isn't it? Can I tear it up?" So I said, "Yes."
Do you regret that now?
No. A few months after Bernhard died, I realised they were the last photographs that were being taken of Bernhard, with Henry Moore checking the proofs of one of our facsimile editions of one of his sketchbooks. I mean, he said, "You know, you're the perfectionist."